Shalom, my name is Robin, and I feel honored to have the opportunity to share with you in the next few minutes about the subject of prayer. Charlie asked me if I could contribute. It's humbling, but as I look out in my mind's eye, I see myself surrounded by an army of amazing, wise warriors in his kingdom, women who I know I want to learn from and who I admire. And so as we all just spend the next few minutes together, I hope that I can share something that is encouraging and helpful. The subject of prayer, it's a big subject, something that I've struggled with over the years. It's elusive. I want to pray. I need to pray. And I often feel like I fail to pray. But there is something I've discovered that has made it so much easier for me. And I hope that the same will be true for you as I share it. There's an author of a prayer book I love. Her name is Sarah Evian, and she says something that I want to share as I begin sharing with you today. Prayer is the bridge that enables us to step outside our known selves to a reality beyond. Isn't that how you feel when you feel a need to pray? And here's the thing. We, as women who are lovers of God and part of his kingdom, realize that there is a reality beyond this. In fact, it is reality. This isn't quite reality, and we want to reach it and we want to dwell in it. And that's a problem sometimes because we're trapped in this natural world and we need to navigate it well and with wisdom, but he's given us a way. And that is what I'd like to share today. Years ago, a friend and mentor of mine shared kind of a map, if you will, or a method of entering into God's presence that I have found transformative, to be honest. And it has to do with his house. It has to do with his tabernacle. Let's just start with a basic definition of prayer, which most of us are familiar with already, but let's review it together. Tefillah, the Hebrew word for prayer, comes from the verb palel, which means to connect. Now, the reason that that is significant is because I have a desire, a yearning to connect with the divine, with Hashem, if you will, because I know that I'm in a bit of a spiritual exile and I don't always feel connected to him ever since Eden, when we became disconnected and we were dismissed from the East. We're kind of wandering until we encounter him and he invites us back. Years ago, when my friend introduced this idea to me, at first it felt a little awkward, but then I realized it was a super good fit for me because I have this thing about houses. Ever since I've been a little girl, I've just loved to design houses, think about houses, improve houses, and make people's houses prettier, better, however you want to say it. I'm a designer by profession, and so when I was reading through the Torah portion this year in particular, it really got my attention when God says, I'm going to place a house in your midst, a place where I can live for you to connect with me and learn about me. Because you see, through the years, one thing I've learned about people is that whether they intend to or not, whether we intend to or not, the furnishings and the way we design and furnish and present our homes and our houses tell a lot about who we are. It just does, whether we intend for it to or not. And so when I read in Exodus 25:8, where God says, let them make a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst, it occurs to me that everything about this is a representation and a message to me about who he is. The thing that's important to understand about the tabernacle or this sanctuary is that it is an eternal place in the heavenlies before he ever gave us the design to recreate it here on earth so that we have a way to connect with him. So what that means is if he dwells in the Holy of Holies in the heavens, and he gave us a pattern here in this world to follow for us to approach the Holy of Holies, that is a way that I can connect with him from here to there, and that reduces the space. That's what I've come to really recognize prayer being. It's a way to diminish distance. It not only diminishes distance between myself and Hashem. When I pray for you, when I pray for a friend, it diminishes the distance between myself and that person. Haven't you found that to be true? Even an enemy, when I pray for an enemy, getting better at that, trying to learn how to do that more, it diminishes the distance between myself and that person. Somehow, supernaturally, that happens. So all that to say, I want to talk about this sanctuary that God gave us the pattern to follow so that we can enter in and meet with him in a special way. There's a verse in Proverbs 9:1. It says, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. So what that's telling us is that wisdom, personified as a woman, builds a life. And it's based on 7 pillars. There are 7 pillars of wisdom. There are 7 spirits of wisdom described in Isaiah. There are 7 days of creation. And don't you know, when we enter into this tabernacle that God gave us a pattern for in his Torah, it's actually the Torah portions that we're in right now, which is super cool. There are 7 pieces of furniture. And as we encounter each of those furnishings one by one in the order that he gave them, and we ponder how he presents them to us and how he wants us to meet with him at each piece of furniture, we learn things about him that he wants us to know. And as we move through, we get closer to him. Isn't that cool? Are you ready to explore this idea? All right, let's do it. Now, some of you are more familiar with this pattern than others. Some are really familiar, and this might be new to others. But briefly, I just want us to have a mental picture, and then this is going to disappear, because I want us to use our sacred imagination more than we use a line drawing on the screen right now. But I want to point out a few things. First of all, we have to intentionally decide to leave the busyness and the craziness of what feels like reality, but we learn really isn't, to enter a new domain, a new realm, a different space. It's a sacred space, and we enter it through the east. And when we think about how we left Eden through the east, I think it's really cool that God invites us to re-enter his house, to approach him once again at the east. And the first piece of furniture that we'll encounter is the altar. And I want you to picture it here. And then the next one, as we make our way across, will be the laver. All of this area is exposed to the open sky. There's no cover. And this area around the edges is more or less a tent that from the outside looks very plain and nondescript. And those wandering around out here probably think, what is the point of going inside a tent? But we know that his tents are lovely. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. And we're invited to enter in and to explore and to make our way closer and closer to the true Mishkan, the true tabernacle, which does have a covering over it and has the furnishings inside that we'll encounter one by one. We'll have the golden candlesticks, and then we'll see a table of bread, the showbread, the bread of faces, and then we'll see the altar of incense, and then this amazing curtain which has a story to tell. And then inside, the most secret and internal and significant place of all, which represents our very spirit, is the Holy of Holies. And God's presence dwells there. But we start here. So as I mentioned, in the outer court, I imagine as I go into this place of prayer that I'm coming to an altar. And when I approach that altar, I see that it's a combination of wood and bronze. It's almost like God is saying, here is where the divine and the earthly begin to intermingle. And there is an overlay of those and a meeting of those. And we're invited at this point, ladies, to present ourselves as a living sacrifice. Now you might think, but I did that. Well, it's not a once and done, is it? I have to present myself at that altar over and over and over again, because what I do is I forget and I get distracted and I displace the Lord of my life with other things, with worries, with concerns, with fears. And a fear of what people think or don't think, a fear of what might happen, that's a big one. And anything we fear other than God becomes our God. And so it's time to reapproach this altar and lay our lives down and say, I remember, I return, and I want you to be the one and only in my heart once again. Make this heart that can turn into stone overnight a heart of flesh once again. Soften it, fill it, and restore it. And that's the business that I do at this altar. And I do that in my heart and mind, ladies. This is a place that transcends time and space. That's the beauty of this heavenly pattern. It's like a map or a schematic that we carry inside our minds that we can enter anytime we wish. And so after this altar, it's time to approach, remember what that is. It's the laver. Now, if you remember, the laver was made of melted down mirrors made of bronze. Imagine the women surrendering their mirrors, which represented their own vanity, which represented who they see themselves as. And those become a laver full of water to wash and to prepare our hands and our feet and ourselves. You know how I see it? I kind of have begun to consider this portion of my journey through the Tabernacle as like a miniature mikvah. I've always wished that I had a physical mikvah to visit regularly. Well, guess what? We do. Because when I approach this place, it's a very real place. And I look into the water and I see my reflection and I remember what he says about me. And I begin to return to choosing to believe what he says about me is true instead of the whispers, that nagging whisper that the enemy is saying that I need to believe is true about me, or what others may be saying is true about me. I see the reflection of the me that he promises, that he cherishes, that he created, and he wants fellowship with. It's an amazing thing. And when I gaze into that water, which is no longer a mirror for vanity, but a reflection of who he says I am, I see the sky behind me. And you know what that does? It expands the context so that I don't have this shrunken in world of fear and insecurity. I remember my place in a world and all the promises that he's given me in his word. And so I return to him, not only with a clean and pure heart, but clean hands. Because the way I see myself and the doubts that I have about what he has said is true affects the way that I do my business in the world, and the things I touch and the places I go and what I accomplish becomes tainted because everything gets distorted. So it's time to refresh and it's time to clean. There's a Hasidic saying. It says there's no room for God in those who are full of themselves. It kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? How quickly I get full of myself. How quickly. As I move through this outer court and I visit the altar and the laver, I remember Psalm 51:17. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a contrite heart. You will despise neither. So when I visit the altar and the laver, my heart becomes broken and contrite. And Psalm 24, we're reminded, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? In other words, who can draw close to him? And who shall stand in his holy place? That is our goal as we approach him in prayer. He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. You know, we tend to swear deceitfully to ourselves. We say things to ourselves about ourselves that aren't true, and we believe the lies that the enemy tells us about him. So as we move through the outer court of this sacred and amazing place, this heavenly house that God has given us to visit and to meet with him, we visit his altar, the laver, and then we get closer to that holy place. That holy place behind a curtain that once again we have to be intentional about entering. And one of the reasons it's so hard to make that choice is because it's not a real crowded place. There are fewer people with the courage to go here. It's not the place to be as the world sees things, or even as many of God's people see things. So even some of God's people who are wandering around in the outer court don't make it as far as the holy place and the Mishkan. So as we enter into this holy place, one of the things I want you to realize is that even though it's smaller on the outside looking in, and when you enter in physically it's smaller, spiritually it's the biggest place you've been yet. Because the smaller things look from the outside spiritually, the bigger they are from the inside spiritually, but you don't know that until you have the courage to enter into it. That really does describe the experience of prayer itself, doesn't it? And so the first thing that I see in this holy place is that it's not illuminated by the sun, and it doesn't have a natural source of light that the outer court had. You know where the light comes from? The light comes from this beautiful golden candlestick that you'll see at your left. It's a beautiful 7-branch menorah. And you realize that on this menorah there are branches and flowers and almonds, and it kind of reminds you of a tree. In fact, it kind of reminds you of the tree of life. And then you remember, oh, the tree of life, its paths are peace, but it's for those who grasp it and hang on to it. Those are the ones who derive the joy and the wisdom from it. And so as you look at this menorah and you see these 7 branches producing light, you remember that that light only comes as a result of olive oil that is continually fed into these beautiful candlesticks. And that olive oil only came about as a result of what? Crushing. So this is the place, ladies, where I stop in this holy place, in this place of prayer. And I ask myself, what is the pain in my life right now that I've been resisting, even resenting? Am I thankful for it? Am I trusting that this is part of the crushing necessary for my life to have more light? And when I begin to really lean in and believe what he has said, I know that all pain is birth pain, and he's wanting to birth something in me that will be able to produce more life, not only so that other people see light, but so I see light. There's a verse in Psalms 36:9. It says, "For with you is the fountain of life, and by your light we see light." So as I'm standing by this menorah and I'm allowing this beautiful light to shine on me and illuminate this space, I'm suddenly able to remember the things that he has been trying to tell me, but I haven't been able to hear, because by his light, I am able to see light. And then all of a sudden, I look over to the right, and if you remember, ladies, we have a table, and it has plenty of bread. Bread for every tribe, 12 loaves of bread, the bread of faces. And it's as if these loaves of bread are seeing across this space to this beautiful menorah, which has almonds that look like eyes. It's as if they're looking at each other. And it's as if God is saying, everything you need in terms of light and understanding, I provide for you. I invite you to allow the things in your life to bring the crushing that produces something meaningful and important. It's not meaningless. It's not random. And everything you need in terms of physical nourishment or spiritual nourishment, I provide for you. I give you the bread. But man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every mouth that proceeds out the mouth of God. And so I stand there in this space, and I'm amazed. And I recognize that the two pieces of furniture that we have talked about so far aren't quite as far apart as they were out in the outer court. They're closer together. It's as if God is sending a message. The closer you move in toward me, the closer things are together. I'm diminishing the space. I'm diminishing the space. That is the progress we make as we move through his tabernacle and approach him in prayer. And then, as we stand in this holy place, we notice something else that's totally amazing. We have thanked him for his provision. Suddenly, we're overwhelmed with gratitude for things that we've just not been mindful of up until this point because we've been too busy. We haven't visited this space, and we haven't listened, and we haven't entered into his rest enough to hear. But now we are, and now we not only sense the candlesticks and the table of bread, but we realize this entire space is filled with the most beautiful and fragrant aroma, and we see that there's an altar of prayer there. And this place of prayer is maintained carefully, once again, by crushing. The incense has to be crushed. It has to go through pressure in order to produce the fragrance. We bring that with us. We can be honest here. We sense gratitude for everything he's providing. And we sense that everything that we're going through right at this minute is purposeful. And we choose to say, it's good because you're good. And you see me, and I'm going to trust you enough to continue to move closer to you. In Exodus 30, verse 8, we're told, when Aaron sets up the lamps at twilight, he shall burn it, a regular incense offering before Adonai throughout the generations. This is a perpetual thing, these prayers that go up. Our prayers are like incense. And what happens when we pray, it isn't something that is stuck in a space. It spreads throughout the entire domain of where we're occupying. And it reaches over that curtain into his presence. It rises over the curtains, ladies, into the Holy of Holies. It goes into where he is and it reaches him. Isn't that amazing? Let's just stop for a moment and be there and ponder that. And as we look up at the curtain on the other side of this altar of incense, we recognize that there are cherubim. And we remember that when we were dismissed from the garden because fellowship was broken and we left from the east, we looked over our shoulder and we saw that there were cherubim guarding the entrance. Well, here they are again, as if to say, there's a way back. You see, when God gave us the design for his sanctuary, for his tabernacle, it's as if Eden is once again invading earth. And he says, enter in and draw close to me. You know, there's a beckoning. And somewhere between his beckoning to us and our response to that, in that pause, we have a choice. And when we choose to respond and move toward him, that is a choice we make for relationship. Isn't that amazing? And once again, that space is diminished. But he doesn't force and he doesn't coerce. He invites and he beckons. And that yearning we have, that homesickness we have, he's provided a way back. But we have to choose it. And it takes effort. I don't think that sloppy, unthought out prayer can take us as close to him as we yearn for. And that's why I have loved this pattern of prayer and moving through this pattern that is heavenly. It's not our idea. It's not my idea, certainly. It's his idea. It is eternal. It's an eternal, beautiful, perfect pattern. And don't forget, everything we encounter there is telling us something very, very important and specific about his heart. As we move in to the Holy of Holies, this takes the most courage. This takes the most courage because nobody can go in there with us. This is where we decide to stand before Adonai alone. Just him and us. Just ourselves before him. This is where we know that there's nothing hidden from him, but we trust him that he's invited us into his presence. This is where he dwells. And in this space, the source of light isn't from the sun above, and it isn't from a candle menorah fed with oil, as beautiful as that is. This space is filled with his presence, his Shekinah glory. It's the light that fills the Holy of Holies as no other space. And there are two furnishings in this space. The first one is the ark, and it contains three important things. And these things are kind of sad, but kind of not, because what it does is we're reminded that we have rebelled against his authority, his provision, and his instruction. Because in this ark, we have Aaron's rod, which represents the authority that he has given us and provided for us, but so often we resist because we think we have a better way. It contains tablets, 2 sets in fact. The first one's broken, remember? But then the second one restored. And on these tablets is the instruction for life, and yeah, we resisted a lot, but it's there for us to approach again. And he says, come closer. It's still here for you. And then the third thing, of course, is the manna. It's his provision, which often we resist because we think we can do for ourselves. And he says, I will always provide what you need. Just do it my way and it's perfect. So these things are there to remind us. His eternal provision, authority, his instruction, it's all there, lovingly offered to us. And he invites us to come closer. And then over the top of this ark is the cover, pure gold. And guess what's on top? The cherubim, as if they're inviting us back into his presence. Imagine that. Imagine that. And many say that these cherubim represent male and female, like bridegroom and bride coming together once again as one. Because once again, we think about the furnishings within this most important, intimate space. There is no space between the cover and the ark. They touch. They are one. They are connected. And that is the whole point of prayer, is coming into a place of reconnection. Isn't that amazing? I mentioned before that what looks small from outsiders who don't understand looking on, but we have the courage to enter into his tent, into his house. It's a broad place. Psalm 18:19 says, he brought me into a broad place. He rescued me because, this is the part that's so hard for us to believe sometimes. He brought me here because he delighted in me. So this space that we can occupy in the Holy of Holies isn't restrictive and it isn't small. It's a very, very large space where we will be able to think and breathe and live and know who he is and who we are more than ever before. The picture on the screen just represents that arriving at a place of intimacy and oneness with him, realizing how much he loves me, how much he has made a way, because that curtain you see represents the flesh of our Messiah. And when his flesh was torn, when he visited our earth, that curtain was literally torn as if to say, come on in. I've made the way even better, even more. I've made myself more approachable. Isn't that amazing? So this is the biggest, freest space that we can occupy. But we have to be intentional and we have to determine to respond to his beckoning and to make our way back, because we forget and we wander. But we can always, always enter in, because his tabernacle never goes away. It never goes away. And he says that we are a sanctuary. And so we carry this within us. That is the most amazing thing of all. He's made a way for this house to be patterned after his house and to connect with him in a most real and life-giving way. You know, King David didn't get to enter the temple physically because it wasn't here yet. But he always prayed and talked about how he loved to be in the house of God. You know how he entered in? The same way we enter in. And so as we enjoy being in his presence and we think about how wonderful it is that he has provided his tabernacle as a pattern for life and a house that we can visit and become more and more at home in, I just want to read a passage that David wrote as he pondered these things. One thing have I asked of Adonai, and that will I seek, to dwell in the house of Adonai all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of Adonai, and to meditate in his temple. For in the day of trouble, he will hide me in his sukkah, conceal me in the shelter of his tent, and set me upon a rock. Then will my head be high above my enemies around me. In his tabernacle I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing, yes, sing praises to Adonai. I hope that just this small introduction to how you can pray through his tabernacle makes this passage even more meaningful. And we can understand what Proverbs means in chapter 24, where it says, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. He wants us to pattern our house after his house. And he wants us to fill our life with precious and pleasant riches. So much more to say. And I'm not sure I was able to communicate everything I have on my heart effectively, but hopefully you have an idea of how you can use his tabernacle, this beautiful eternal pattern from the heavenlies, as a very real and tangible way to leave the mundane, unreal, temporal world and enter into his presence step by step by step. And every single detail matters. So as you spend more time in the portions this coming week and the weeks after, don't skip over the details. Every detail tells us something so precious about who he is. And then we know who we are. So Shalom, and thank you for spending these moments with me.